All right, what's going on, guys? We're going to get started with the summary of markets. This is week 34. We're also going to do the options watch list right after. So, if you guys didn't watch the last video, you can go watch that really quickly before starting this one. But basically, everything that we said yet again came true. I told you guys that you were looking at 320 as your lower target on SPY. If you did continue lower, look at where we bounced. The low of last week was 319.80. I missed it by 20 cents. Sorry about that. But we did bounce around that 320 area. You are starting to find a lot of support now. There's big bull divs coming in on multiple time frames. You have like a 4-hour bull div coming in here, 4-hour pivot being regained. You have this 4-hour pivot down here that got front ran a little bit. We also have the 1-hour kind of putting in a bulldog, double bottoming, showing a lot of support. One thing to note is when you see the Momo doing this, this is what I call a Momo pinch. It's when the trend line and the histogram are both pinching together and they're almost identical in their movement. So typically when it does this, there's a very strong momentum shift happening and you want to be following that pinch. So if the pinch is moving up, you want to be following that, that move up. You do not want to be betting against this pinch. So as long as this keeps pinching upward, this move should be pretty strong. Okay, so SPY definitely looks very bullish. This looks like a bottom reversal. If you guys look at ES, I talked about this a lot in Discord. We traded this level. We took a bunch of day trades off this level. The 3200 pivot, 3196 to be exact, basically called the bottom to the penny, to the tick. Okay, so as long as that pivot holds, this is a bullish bounce. Okay, if we do start to find value below that pivot, then I would start to be worried, and you'd probably want to target like 3100, 3000, these lower levels. But for now, 3200 pivot holding to the tick, so make sure to keep an eye on that level. So right now, SPY is putting in basically like a falling wedge. You can almost consider this a falling wedge. I can go ahead and delete a lot of this old analysis. We can start fresh since we are kind of getting in a trend shift. But you can kind of see that we're almost putting in like a falling wedge. It depends on kind of how you take these. You can take it from back here, or you can take it from closer, so something like this, and that will give you your falling wedge. So what we want to see is we want to see a breakout kind of above this pivot and then hold value above 331. Now what will probably happen is this will try to push up, but there's a pivot, 50 moving average, and the trail. So there's going to be a lot of resistance. There's also a gap right here. So we have a lot of resistance right around this area. So what will most likely happen is it will try to break out. It will probably lose buyers, and then it will push back down into the wedge. Then you want to see it hold around kind of 320 to around 325. So watch for a breakout. If it can't find value above like 337, 338, very likely going to pull back to 325, 320, and then try to find some value and then push higher. Okay, so watch for that scenario. That's what we're going to be keeping an eye on. Right now, it's very bullish, so we could just go vertical here, but very unlikely seeing the price action that we've been seeing the past couple of weeks. It's not just going vertical, right? So keep an eye on it. Probably going to get a little choppy. We have the debates. I believe they're on Wednesday. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the debates are on Wednesday. So there's probably going to be some volatility going into that. So keep an eye on that. But I think you should definitely keep a short-term bullish bias on SPY. All right, moving on to gold. What we talked about last week did not play out. I did say that this looked very bullish above all the support, but you wanted to shift bearish if you did break below like 1920. So we did have a little break below 1920 here. We broke all of our support, and then we continued lower. So I told you if you did break that 1920, very likely going to revisit kind of that 1810 range. You are bouncing a little early. You're kind of bouncing in the middle of nowhere here. If you zoom out, there's almost no support here. You can even pull up like a volume profile. Let's look at a visible range. There's little to no support here. So you're kind of forming a volume shelf. This is from these previous candles. Like if I take away these candles here, you can see there's literally almost nothing here. So it's kind of bouncing in a gap. So maybe we're going for more of a gap fill, a volume gap, I mean. But you can see here, look at that little level that I marked out. Look at what it lines up with. It lines up with that high volume node right before that breakout. So you kind of have a point of origin down there that you want to keep an eye on around 1810. I wouldn't take the buy here. It's just kind of in the middle of nowhere. There's no real direction. I think if you bounce, you could still easily go lower. So I would watch out for this. There were talks about stimulus as well, but we've been getting talks about stimulus for weeks now, maybe even months, and nothing has happened. But if we do get stimulus, it will help gold and silver, so keep an eye on that. All right, moving on to crude oil. One thing that I missed last week was I missed this pivot here. If you looked at the 4-hour, there was a pivot coming in that called the top beautifully. I did not mention this in last week's video, I don't believe. But I did say that you were looking bullish, but it was getting a little extended. And you kind of ran out of buyers here. So you pulled back. You're bouncing off this level. I think this is a 4-hour level of it. I do remember. Yeah, it's a 4-hour pivot. So we are kind of bouncing off a 4-hour pivot here. It's almost like a really ugly bull flag. So there's no real direction. If I had to pick a direction, I'd say you're slightly bullish because you are above these 3 pivots right here. But if you start to go lower, just watch out for these pivots. And the lower target would be 37.84. You're not going to be very bullish until you break this high right here, 41.50, 41.60. So keep an eye on that. You're kind of just ranging right now, no direction. All right, looking back at Bitcoin, basically exactly what we said on Bitcoin came true. You popped up into this zone of resistance, failed the pivot, came down. Now look at where we're bouncing. Bouncing right off that pivot. So let me delete all this old analysis so you guys can fully grasp what is happening right here. Look at these pivots. So you have this pivot on the bottom. I told you guys, this was like 2 weeks ago. I told you do not be bearish if you're above this pivot. So you had a ton of buy pressure come in. All those wicks in that same area, that's buy pressure. Clearly the dips were being bought. Popped up. I told you this was resistance last week. Now you have that pivot acting as the high. 50 moving average curling as resistance. And then boom, pulled back. Now we're testing that pivot again. And look at how we're bouncing off of it. So basically there's no direction here. You're bullish above the pivot, bearish below this pivot. No real direction in between, but you do kind of have a makeshift bulldog coming in here. Double bottom, pop up, pull back. So if you do start to break out here, your first initial target would be that 11.1 pivot. Then I would probably watch around 11.950, 12,000, somewhere around there. But you do have that bulldog coming in. So I would probably be neutral, but if you really wanted to pick a side, slightly bullish above this lower pivot, okay? All right, Ethereum, basically the same thing. Let's get rid of all this old analysis. You had a couple of resistance levels. Let me just delete everything. A couple of resistance levels coming in. Basically, I told you the same thing on Ethereum. You were bearish on Ethereum. You had those sell signals coming in on the OTS. You were failing the trail, failing the 50 moving average. Look at this 50 moving average. Came in, resistance, resistance, fail downward. Look at where we bounced yet again. You have that pivot acting as support. So same thing here. I would be slightly bullish, very slightly, above this pivot, but you are sitting right on this pivot. So if you lose this pivot around 353, very likely going to revisit 322. If you do try to push higher, you have a resistance around 373 and 386. Okay, I would not be very bullish until you get back above 390, around that back of that bulldog. So this one hasn't really put in that head yet, unless you want to consider that like a miniature bulldog. But I'd be more bullish back above the back of the bulldog, 391, and then you would target kind of around 438. Okay, but I'd be very slightly bullish, kind of neutral. All right, that's the summary of markets, guys. Let's move on to the options watch list. Let me save this. We're going to change to our other loadout. Or layout, I should say. Let's take a look at some of these levels that I gave you guys in Discord. All right, so NEO is on big watch this week, guys. If the market looks good, keep a close eye on NEO, especially if Tesla looks good. If Tesla looks good, watch NEO. I told you guys there was this really clean trend line way back here on NEO, and we broke below it, but then it instantly got bought up, and now we're sitting back above that trend line. As long as it holds above this trend line, NEO is a good buy. Now, if you get below the trail, probably around 1750, it's going to be a little weak. You probably will revisit around 1550. But as long as you're above that trend line, I think you can easily get back to the pivot around 20, and then the ascending triangle high would be around 21. And then above that, you're going to fly. You could probably easily see 25 if you break above that, okay? So keep an eye on NEO. Very, very big watch on NEO for next week. I'm still holding NEO. I think I'm in some naked calls because I let go of my sell side for a profit. Let's see, Microsoft. Microsoft is kind of ranging here. You're finding a little bit of accumulation. You do have a bottom signal coming in on the Momo on the daily. So you were a little extended down here. Now we're popping back up. I like Microsoft if you hold above the 50 moving average, above 210, 211. But anywhere below that, it's kind of sketchy to buy up here because if you guys watch my accumulation distribution video, you would kind of be buying the top of an accumulation, okay? So I would be very careful buying around like 208, 209, anticipating the breakout. It's a lot of resistance. But if you buy above like 211, that should be safer. I would target like the top of the wick sniper around 217 or that pivot around 227, okay? Apple, kind of the same story. You're ranging down here. You are back above the pivot, back above the 50 moving average. I like Apple above 113. I would probably see 118 as a target. And then you also have this gap fill around 131, okay? But unless you find value or turn white, at least on the OTS, I'd be really sketch below 113. And then your lower targets would be 104.96. All right, Facebook, basically the same thing. All the tech stocks look the same. So you're not going to be really bullish until you're back above 263. Then I would target the gap fill around 282. Lower support, 243, 234. All right, same thing, Netflix. Bullish above 497, target 524, excuse me, and then 552. Lower supports, 458, 441. Same thing on Amazon, putting in a pretty big range. You're actually re-entering an old range. So look at what Amazon looks like. If you zoom out, it's kind of putting in a head and shoulders. So if Amazon pushes up, but then fails this range high, this is kind of becoming the shoulder line. This would be the neckline. This would be the shoulder line, okay? So watch these two levels. This would be around 3250 and let's just say 2890. Those are going to be your two key levels on Amazon moving forward. If you break above this, you could be very bullish. You break below this, you're very bearish. In between that, you could kind of sell the highs up here and then buy the lows down here, okay? All right, Tesla is in a very bearish channel here, but look at what you're doing. You're bouncing off the 50 moving average. You're also bouncing off that pivot, and you're also bouncing off the middle of this channel. Okay, so you have a lot of buy pressure coming in here with a lot of confluence. The only problem is very little momentum, very little buy action. It's just kind of standard volume. There's not like a lot of buyers stepping in here. Okay, so what you want to see for Tesla is obviously a gap fill. You have another gap right there as well. So you want to break above this channel and then probably find some value, maybe a little bit of consolidation. And this would kind of look like a bulldog, right? Double bottom, pop up, pull back, and then boom, explode. Okay, and then you would target like 500, 520. But until you find value outside of this bearish channel, I would still be bearish. This little zone right here, I would be looking to sell this until you find value above it. Okay, and then you would be looking for the 325, 330 area as your target. Okay. All right, guys, that is the summary of markets week 34 and the options watch list. I will see you guys tomorrow morning for our trading session. All right, guys, you guys have a good rest of your weekend. See you later.